What do you want us to say? You asks us, what do you do when you see a guard? And I says, stab the fetcher in the back. What do you prefer? We challenge him to a game of chits. So much ambition, so little education, said Letos with a sigh. My dear friends, we aren't mugging some Nord tourists fresh off the ferry. The Cobbler's Guildhall may not sound intimidating, but tonight, when the Deuce collection is housed there before being sent to the banks, the security is going to be tired than a Quana's ass. You can't just stab at every bag you encounter and expect to make it into the vaults. Why don't you explain specifically what you'd like us to do? asked Asgal Shah calmly, trying to keep the tone of the group down. Most locals at the Plot and Plaster corner club in Tel Ruch knew enough not to listen in, but she knew better than to take any chances. The common thief, said Letos, pouring himself more grief, warming to his subject, sticks his dagger in his opponent's back. This may slay the target, but more often gives him time to scream and drenches the attacker with blood. Not good. Now a good throat slashing, properly executed, and can both slay and silence a guard and leave the thief relatively blood-free. And after all, after the robbery, we don't want people seeing a bunch of blood-soaked butchers running through the streets, even in Tel Ahrun, that's likely to warrant suspicion. You know what I thought of? You know, after your sneaking is good enough, or maybe you can do it from the very beginning, as long as the enemy is weak. You know, when you backstab, you sometimes slit their throats instead of just hitting them in the back. This says it like here. Sticks his dagger in his opponent's back, and then now a good throat slashing, properly executed, can slay and silence a guard and leave the thief relatively blood-free. What would be cool if you could, like, instead of using perks like in other games or just knowing this from the very beginning, you could find the book like this, like finding and reading Three Thieves gives you a perk to, or like a method to slash people's throats or something like that. That would be cool. Anyway, if you can catch your victim lying down asleep or resting, you are in excellent position. You place one hand over the mouth with your thumb under the chin. It even like describes like how to do different methods. Over the mouth with your thumb under the chin. Then you use your other hand to slit the throat, and quickly turn the head to one side so the body bleeds out away from you. There is a risk here of becoming bloodstained if you don't move the head quickly enough. If you're unsure, strangle the victim first to avoid blood that tends to spur out in 3-foot jets when someone is stabbed while alive. A very good friend of mine, a thieving Kinesis, whose name I won't mention, swears by the strangle and slash technique. Simply put, you grab your victim's throat behind, and while throttling him, you batter his face against the opposite wall. When the victim is thus rendered unconscious, you slash his throat while still holding him from behind, and the risk of staining one's clothes with blood is practically non-existent. The classic technique, which requires less grabbing than my friend's variation, is to place one hand over the victim's mouth and then saw through the throat in 3 or 4 strokes rather like playing a violin. It requires a little effort, and while there is quite a bit of blood, it all jets forward away from you. There's no reason when one knows one is going to be slitting throats not to take some precautions and bring some extra equipment. The best neck hackers I know generally carry a bit of wadded cloth on the aft side of their knives to keep blood from getting on their cuffs. It's impractical for this sort of assignment, but when you're only anticipating one or two victims, nothing beats throwing a sack over the target's head, drawing the string tight, and then supplying the killing blow or blows. Emmeline laughed loudly. Can I see a demonstration sometime? Very soon, said Letos, if Galsaya has done her job. Galsaya brought out the map of the guild house, freshly stolen, and they began to detail out the strategy. The last several hours had been a whirlwind to all. In less than a day, the three had met, formulated a plan, bought or stolen the necessary ingredients, and were about to execute it. Not one of the three were sure whether confidence or stupidity were driving the other two, but the fates were aligned. The guild house was going to be robbed. When the sun set, Lewis, Galsaya, and Emmeline approached the Clobbers' guild house on the east end of town. Galsaya used her cachoes of stone flour to mask their scent from the guard wolves as the three passed over the parapets. She also acted as lead scout, and Letos was impressed. For someone of relative inexperience, she knew her way through shadows. Letos' expertise was demonstrated a dozen times, and the guards were of such a diverse variety, he was able to demonstrate all the means of silent assassination he had developed over the years. Emmeline opened the vault in his unique and systematic method. As the tumblers fell beneath his fingers, he softly sang an old dirty tavern song about the 99 loves of Boethia. He said it helped him focus and organize difficult combinations. Within seconds, the vault was open and the gold was in hand. They left the guild house an hour after he entered. No alarm had been raised, and the gold was gone, and corpses lay pooling blood on the stone floors within. Well done, my friends, well done. You learned well, Letos said as he poured the gold pieces into the specially designed compartments in his tunic sleeves, where they held fast with no jiggling or unusual bulges. We'll meet back at the plot and plaster tomorrow morning and split up the bounty. The group parted ways. The only person who knew the most covert route through the city sewer system, Letos, slipped in through a duct and vanished below. Galsaya threw on her shawl, muddied her face to resemble an old flash fortune-teller, and headed north. Emmeline headed east into the park, trusting his unnatural senses to keep him away from the city watch. Now I teach him the greatest lesson of all, thought Letos as he sloshed through the labyrinth tunnels of sludge. His car was waiting where he left it at the city gates, making a laconic lunch of the chokeweed shrub to which it had been leashed. On the road to Wubek, he thought of Galsaya and Emmeline. Perhaps they had been caught and brought in for questioning already. It was a pity he couldn't see them undergoing interrogation. Who would break under pressure first? Emmeline was certainly the tougher of the two, but Galsaya doubtless had hidden reserves. It was merely intellectual curiosity. They thought his name was Letos, and he was meeting them at the plot and plaster. The authorities wouldn't therefore be looking for a Dunmer named Sathis, celebrating his wealth miles and miles away in Vivek. As he prodded his mouth forward and the sun began rising, Sathis pictured Galsaya and Emily not undergoing interrogation, but sleeping the good deep sleep of the wicked, dreaming of how they would spend their share of the gold. Both would wake up early and rush to the plot and plaster. He could see them now, Emmeline laughing and carrying on, Galsaya hushing him to avoid bringing undue attention. They would take a couple of flagons of grief, perhaps order a meal, a big one, and wait. Hours would pass, and so would their moods. The chain of reactions that every betrayed person exhibits: nervousness, doubt, bewilderment, anger. The sun was fully risen when Sathis reached the stables of his house on the outskirts of Wuvek. He reined in his guar and filled its feed. The rest of the stalls were empty. It wouldn't be until that afternoon, when his servants returned from the feast of Saint Rome's and Guinnesses. They were good people, and he treated them well, but from past experience he knew that servants talked. If they began to connect his absences with thefts in other towns, it was only a matter of time before we would go to the authorities or blackmail him. After all, they were human. It was best in the long run to give them a week off with pay whenever he was out of town on business. He slipped the gold into the vault in his study and went upstairs. The schedule had been tight, but Sathis had given himself a few hours to rest before his household returned. His own bed was wonderfully soft and warm compared to the dreadful mattress he had to use at the canton in Tel Arun. Sathis woke up some time later from a nightmare. For a second after he opened his eyes, he thought he could still hear Imolin's voice nearby, singing the 99 Loves of Boethia. He lay still in his bed, waiting, but there was no sound except the usual creaks and groans of his old house. Afternoon sunlight came through his bedroom window in ribbons, catching dust. He closed his eyes. The song returned, and Sathis heard the vault door in his study swing open. The smell of stoneflower filled his nose, and he opened his eyes. Only a little of the afternoon sunlight could pierce the inside of the burlap sack. A strong, feminine hand clamped over the mouth, and a thumb jabbed under his chin. Just as his throat opened and his head was shoved to the side, he heard Galsai in her typical calm voice. "Thank you for the lesson, Sathis." Or no, in her calm voice. Thank you for the lesson, Sathis." Cool. So he taught them a bunch of lessons, and then they used those lessons against him. Awesome. It was a pretty cool story, I must say. Let's do it like this. Pow, pow, pow. Did I hit it? Oh, I hit it now. Not me, not me, not me. Die, 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 die. Fusroda, Fusroda, Fusroda. Die, 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 my die. Oh no, 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 no. Everything. Drink everything. Oh my goodness. Did I save? I hope I saved. I hope there was a save. Son of a bitch. Where do I go? Where do I go? What? What the fuck? What the fuck? What the fuck? Okay. Oh my god. I'm angry.
Carlia's been through here.
I'm very angry.
Stench in here. This place smells of death.
You smell of death.
This shouldn't take long. Ah! Out of my way!
Sweet.
How disappointing. The chain over there and watch out for the spikes. Looks
Sure
Jeremiah
thing,
reset
Mr.
all
Monk.
the traps.
Whoops. Sneaky, sneaky. Wow. Oh, wow. 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 Saving. You rest
You're
mine.
my blade.
I die, joy. Who sees us? Everyone. Don't you dare attack him. Don't you dare. Oh. Oh. Yes. Wait, what? Yes. Yes, my dear.
2 more of them ahead.
Shush.
What was that?
What? I'll spit on you.
Oh, sure! That was hardly worth my time.
Huh. Is there any treasure then? Do I have to... Oh. I thought there was some secret path. I misremembers things. Wow. Oh. I didn't go here last time. Dee. 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 You're so annoying. What's happening? Who's hitting me? Why am I getting hurt? Loses. Who lose on the time? Headshot.
Hiding? The shadows are my domain.
They're not hiding, we are. They just can't see us. Because they ain't human. They are corpses. Stupid corpses. Uh-oh. No, they're not.
Shadows are my domain.
Wait, where are you going, dude?
Is that the best you can
No,
do?
don't attack them. Uh-oh. Steel arrows. What?
Is that the best you can do? How disappointing.
Is that it? were you doing? Just walking around shouting? Flute.
Bone chimes.